Alright guys, so let's talk about the G7 economies today, and it seems that a whole lot of them, they aren't having much luck in 2025. Europe is being hammered with higher energy prices, and that's during a very cold winter without Russian pipeline gas. Then we have Japan. The US just blocked an important deal involving US steel takeover, and as a result, the steel industry there is in crisis. And now Canada is facing big problems. The Prime Minister Justin Trudeau just threw the letter. He has resigned, and it's a big symptom of Canada's overall position in the world. Economic instability eventually leads to political instability.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process. Last night, I asked the President of the Liberal Party to begin that process. This country deserves a real choice in the next election, and it has become clear to me that if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
Now, if you're Canadian, let me know if you miss Trudeau. Are you happy or are you sad about him leaving? But regardless, with Trudeau's resignation, Parliament is essentially in suspension. All proceedings, including debates and votes, can't happen unless they dissolve Parliament itself. Now, this is problematic because we are just 2 weeks away from Trump's inauguration, and we have no idea what economic shocks he would unleash. The global tariff war could begin, and Canada won't be prepared. Now, it gets even crazier with Trump's follow up on the situation. He's going to squeeze their economy in 2025. The United States can no longer suffer the massive trade deficits and subsidies that Canada needs to stay afloat. Justin Trudeau knew this and he resigned. If Canada merged with the US, there would be no tariffs and taxes would go way down. So yes, the threat of tariffs is very real for the Canadian economy going forward. Now, this is a big reason why the previous finance minister resigned. Now, she believed Trudeau didn't have a plan to counter Donald Trump. And in her resignation letter, she hinted at how Canada is getting too broke to fight back, to eventually fire a big bazooka of money when the time comes. They have to keep their fiscal powder dry today to have the reserves for the coming US tariff war. Now, we know the US is heavily in debt. Their deficit is nearly 7% of GDP, and they are paying around $1 trillion annually just in interest payments alone. But because of the dollar, they can borrow money endlessly from the world, at least in the short to medium term. It's not the same situation for Canada. Now, the country on the other hand is spending above their means. Lower revenues and spending measures have resulted in a bigger budget deficit. Now, this has grown by $8.5 billion, bringing the total to above $48 billion. It's one reason why Canada was the first G7 country to cut interest rates. The debt burden is growing fast, but economic growth is stalling. Now, to survive, Canada might have to spend more in 2025, but can they afford it without making inflation worse? It's important to remember why Trudeau got pushed out. Inflation is a very big reason. The economy isn't doing well. The cost of living in Canada is simply spiraling out of control. Take housing for example. Vancouver and Toronto are two of the most unaffordable housing markets in the world. Now just imagine paying 9 to 12 times your income to buy a house there. It's not really possible. Paying rent is also out of this world. Now I couldn't believe the numbers when I first saw it. According to RBC Bank, the percentage of income needed for home ownership in Canada is out of this world. Almost 60% of income is needed to cover mortgage payments, property taxes, and utilities. And in Vancouver, this amount is higher than 96%. This means households either eat nothing for lunch and dinner and they spend nothing at all, or they dig themselves heavily into debt to buy a home. And if that's the case, Canada's running out of options because a trade war with the United States could squeeze their economy to the brink. In today's economy, building multiple income streams is important. Reaching your audience with videos is simply essential. Invideo AI allows you to express and communicate your ideas in the form of stunning videos, the kind you have always wanted to create. Videos you'll be excited to share with your peers in the most seamless way possible, regardless of whatever skill level you are at. Just check out version 3.
I once watched my savings vanish to inflation's relentless tide. Then I discovered gold and stocks, havens against uncertainty. I educated myself, made calculated decisions. Slowly, my financial reality transformed. From rags to riches through the power of strategic investment.
Forget about traditional video tools with steep learning curves. They don't solve the entire video creation process. Invideo is the creative partner that you have always wanted that removes all friction. You can try Invideo AI for free, but if you want to use their generative capabilities, I recommend you go for the generative plan that starts at $96 a month. It gives you the most bang for the buck with 15 generative minutes. Save hundreds of dollars that you would otherwise spend on editing, animating, and other production costs. And if you're already an Invideo user, you can simply go to the add-on section and buy generative seconds. Check it out today. Now, Trump has always been straightforward with his global tariff war, and it consists of two parts. Potentially hit Canada with a 25% tariff, so all goods coming to the US from Canada would cost more. Now, the second part is equally devastating, and that is telling companies to come back to the US, manufacture in America, and you can get benefits in addition to escaping the tariffs.
We're gonna do things I think that haven't been really done before. We're gonna be cutting taxes still further. As you know, we got it down to 21%. We're going to bring it down even below that. You pay 21 if you don't build here, and meaning your product or whatever it is you're building. And if you do, we're going to try getting it down to 15%. But you have to build your product, make your product in the USA.
Now, this poses a very big problem for Canada. The economy here is extremely exposed to the US. And when we use the word extreme, we aren't kidding here, not in the slightest. In 2022, Canada exported to the US around $460 billion worth of goods, and that's over 76% of total exports going into one single country. Conversely, Canadian exports to China were less than 4% of the total. And this gives the US an enormous amount of bargaining power in any trade war, any negotiations with Canada. The Canadians, now they have threatened to cut away energy supply to the US, but can they seriously cut oil and gas to Trump's economy without suffering retaliation? Now, besides the dollar, the US has tremendous leverage because of the size of their consumer base. We can't ignore this. Now, based on purchasing power parity, the US is second in the world just behind China, but their $29 trillion economy dwarfs the rest of the squad put together. It's 52% of the G7 economies. Comparatively, Canada's economy is 10 times smaller at just 2.6 trillion. The export of goods and services is a third of Canada's overall GDP, and this means tariffs of 25% or more, even 10%, could potentially push them into recession. And this is what happens when you don't diversify your trade. Canada push all their economic chips on the US. They bet on the red, white, and blue, but the roulette wheel is about to land on black. Now, this poses another problem for their currency, the Canadian dollar. Now, as a country, when you lose a major trading partner, you lose income, and that's straightforward and very easy to understand. However, when demand for your goods drop, the demand for your local currency also drops. The connection here is very significant. You lose more chances to invoice in the Canadian dollar, or you lose more US dollars flowing in, and either outcome isn't good for the local currency. Now, since 2007, the Canadian dollar or the loonie has been falling against the USD. It went from over $1 to just 71 cents against the greenback, and today it's struggling to go above just 70 cents. In other words, in 17 years, Canada's currency has weakened by over 32%. And this just makes the cost of living crisis even worse. Imports coming into Canada now get more expensive. A few days ago, the Washington Post reported that Trump's tariffs would be pared back. The taxes would only apply to critical imports. As a result, the markets rallied because this is good news for the world. But Trump has denounced it as fake news. He will continue to steamroll ahead with his full tariff plan. And for Canada, this means the 25% tariff threat is still on the cards. And let's think about this a little more. The new US economy could cause higher inflation in Canada. There's a serious risk which will make the cost of living crisis even worse. But there's something we haven't talked about yet, and that is Canada's automotive industry, which is a big pillar in the country. Now, this accounts for 10% of manufacturing GDP and 21% of manufacturing trade. There's a huge amount of economic activity going on here, which means a ton of jobs and a lot of salaries are tied up. And here's the issue: Canada exports the majority of their cars to the US, over 60% goes to the US consumer market. And you also have US auto companies manufacturing in Canada as well. And you can see where we are going with this. Ford produces their Edge and Lincoln Nautilus in Canada. GM does the same with their Zevo line as well. And it's not just US brands. Stellantis, Honda, and Toyota produce a ton of vehicles in the country. And these foreign car makers are building stuff in Canada and they're shipping it down south. That's part of their game plan. So, what happens when Trump imposes his tariffs on global imports coming into the US? Will certain companies be motivated enough to move production back to the United States? Now, we have no idea yet. It depends on the cost of production after all. The decision for companies to move manufacturing boils down to a math equation. However, if it happens, we could see a big exodus of jobs leaving Canada for the US, and the extent of this devastation will be huge. The auto industry supports nearly 500,000 jobs across the country. In addition to this, good paying jobs could be lost. 90% of auto manufacturing jobs pay wages that are higher than provincial and national averages. So, how will Canada replace these jobs? Can they attract well paying companies to fill the gap? And these are big questions, and we don't have all the answers here. But there's a suggestion we'd like to make, and it's an economic one. If US auto companies leave Canada, perhaps it's time to welcome Chinese companies in. Now use Canada as a manufacturing base to build cars and export them to the G7 minus the US. But that would mean reversing Trudeau's tariffs on Chinese EVs. Because of Canada's 100% tariff, companies like BYD, unfortunately, they have paused their expansion plans up north. It's another example of cause and effect, but we could be at an inflection point. The doors are closing, and Canada has to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. And it's not going to be easy here. Shifting away from G7 markets and pivoting to BRICS or China will be like pulling teeth. But there is an upside. Justin Trudeau, he's going to be gone, and repairing relations with the Chinese might become a little easier. And let's recall what happened a few years back, and you understand what I mean.
不合适，
Everything we discuss is then leaked to the paper. That's not appropriate.
而且我们也不是那样进行的。
And that's not how the way the conversation was
如果
conducted.
有诚心，咱们就用一个互相尊重的态度来进行很好的沟通，
If there is
否则这个结果就不好说了。
if
In
there is
Canada, we
sincerity
believe
on
in
your part,
free and open and frank dialogue, and that is what we will continue to have. We will continue to look to work constructively together, but there will be things we will disagree on, and we will
有
have
一
to
些可以
continue.
建设性，但是
创造条件，创造条件
Let's create the conditions first.
啊。
So in 2022, President Xi, he scolded Trudeau at a G20 meeting in Bali. But now that he's gone, there might be less friction between Canada and China. Things might get easier. So amid all the doom and gloom, well, here's your silver lining. Expanding economic ties with China maybe isn't the worst idea. You get factories and you get EV technology. So there's always a way out of a crisis, but it's up to Canada to make the change, and hopefully they do. But let me know what you think. Is Trudeau's exit a good thing or a bad thing? And what options does Canada have to face Trump in 2025? Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.